I stood by the window, my eyes locked onto the figures of Chastity and Michael as they strolled together. Watching them, their hands clasped as they headed towards Michael's vehicle, I felt a sudden, piercing ache in my chest. My heartbeat accelerated, and a sense of suffocation gripped me. They were departure-bound, exiting the home we had constructed in unison. It was unfathomable to me. Chastity, the woman I wed, my all in all, entered my life when we were both in our late 20s, brimming with optimism and drive. I was 28, she 29. I had embarked on my professional journey as a tech engineer, while she had just completed her studies at law school. She was breathtaking, tall, with raven black hair, striking features, and a demeanor of serene confidence. Her intellect and ambition were magnetic, qualities that drew me to her like a charm. Our first encounter at a friend's gathering was unforgettable. She was the star of the night, and I couldn't help but admire her. She swiftly became an indispensable part of my life. Our courtship blossomed into a commitment, and after 2 years we decided to tie the knot. Everything appeared to be idyllic, our mutual aspirations, our plans for the future. We discussed having children, establishing a life side by side, aging hand in hand. In those initial years, I couldn't have asked for a more compatible partner. However, that was before the subtle shift began to take place. As time elapsed, subtle alterations began to manifest. Chastity's career soared to new heights. She rose to partnership at her law firm, and the demands of her position mounted. I witnessed her growing distant, absorbed by her professional endeavors. Her return home was often marked by exhaustion, her attention frequently captivated by her phone, as she responded to work-related messages, or engaged in textual exchanges with colleagues about cases. Initially, I was understanding her job necessitated a significant focus. But as time wore on, I started to feel as though I was merely an item on her agenda. Our connections started to fray. Her occupation was laden with stress, and perhaps a respite was in order. Yet, beneath the surface, the faintest murmurs of uncertainty began to stir within me. It wasn't long before I discerned a series of subtle alterations in her behavior. She clutched her phone with an unusual vigilance, frequently retreating to another room to send texts, and our time together dwindled to a mere shadow of its former self. The epiphany struck on a day she announced her intention to attend a friend's gathering. "I'll hail a cab," she remarked, only to add, "Michael will be by to fetch me instead." Michael, his name had been a staple in my life for years, a college acquaintance whose charisma was the stuff of legend, often the soul of any social gathering. Yet, the prospect of him intertwining with my wife had never crossed my mind. I harbored unwavering trust in both him and her. However, today, as I witnessed them together, advancing towards his vehicle, everything fell into place. A fragment of my spirit fractured. The initial shock and disarray morphed into a frosty, relentless conviction. I watched their departure. My hands trembled, and my attempts to draw breath were met with failure. The image of Chastity's nonchalant stride, her back turned to me, lingered. She was my wife, and yet, she seemed to be slipping away. How could she do this? The need to confide in someone became overpowering. I seized my phone and dialed Julie's number. "Father? Is something amiss?" Her tone was tinged with worry. "Julie, might you come over? We need to have a serious discussion." "I'm on my way," she replied. I ended the call. When Julie arrived, the concern in her eyes was evident. She was well aware that trouble loomed. "Father, are you well?" she queried, approaching and softly placing a hand on my shoulder. I turned to face her, my voice faltering as I fibbed. "I'm all right, Julie, but we must discuss your mother." She regarded me, a furrow of confusion on her brow. "Is it mother? Has something happened to her?" I nodded. "She's involved with Michael. They've been carrying on behind my back." Julie's countenance paled. She settled into a chair, her silence stretched taut before she finally spoke. "I knew, Father. I've been aware for some time now." I was taken aback. "You knew?" she confirmed with a nod, her expression a mingling of sorrow and guilt. "I didn't know how to approach you. I thought you'd eventually piece it together. It was too late before I realized the depth of my affection for Chastity. She was the woman I revered above all others. Intelligent, stunning, and self-reliant. Our paths crossed a decade ago, shortly following her completion of law school. Her resolve and drive were irresistible, endearing her to me. While I toiled away at a modest tech firm, she embarked on her legal career. It seemed unfathomable that someone of her caliber would choose to be with me, yet she did. During that period, Chastity infused my life with a sense of optimism and determination. Her presence alone suffused my world with a newfound radiance. Our initial conversation about matrimony took place after Chastity achieved the rank of partner at her firm. She had already carved a niche for herself in the legal arena, tackling intricate cases, whereas I remained at my small company. I didn't give it much thought. I believed I could support her, alleviate the pressures of her career. She often said, "Marriage is a partnership, not a burden." A philosophy I embraced until today, when I began to see it as a possible evasion of deeper responsibilities. As time went on, Chastity's schedule grew increasingly demanding, often working until the wee hours and attending functions on weekends. Her absence began to weigh heavily on our home. I contemplated engaging her in a conversation, inquiring if she felt overwhelmed or misplaced. But whenever I approached, her imposing demeanor was a barrier. Her stock response was, "It's just a rough patch. I need time to sort things out." Her eyes, always resolute and focused, led me to trust her implicitly. Now, I understand that her stress wasn't solely due to work. It was a response to a void in our marriage. Chastity had always been an open book, willing to share her innermost thoughts and feelings. Yet, as days passed, her smartphone became a fortress of sorts. Whenever I approached, she'd swiftly lock the screen or move it just out of reach. My intentions were never to pry, but the gnawing sense of anxiety and mistrust was impossible to dismiss. There were fleeting moments when I questioned if she had found solace in someone else's arms. It wasn't long before my concerns crystallized into reality. One day, Chastity sprung the news that she planned to spend the weekend with friends. She casually dropped, "Michael will be there too." At the mention of his name, my pulse quickened. Michael was an old college buddy, known for his effervescent personality, always the center of attention with his humor and charisma, though he had a reputation for being flighty. We'd speak of him in passing, and Chastity would affectionately chuckle, labeling him as nothing more than a carefree spirit. I brushed it off at the time, offering a mere, "Okay, take care, be safe," without a shadow of suspicion. But her departure left a disquieting premonition in its wake, as if a dormant emotion had awakened within me. Doubts began to creep in. Was their relationship truly just platonic? Days later, I stumbled upon messages between Chastity and Michael that set my heart on edge. While they contained nothing overtly compromising, the undercurrent of flirtation was unmistakable, sending a shiver down my spine. I paused, debating whether to delve deeper, but ultimately, I chose to refrain. When she returned that night, there was a noticeable shift, a fatigue lining her eyes that spoke of inner turmoil, though she remained silent on the matter. It was in that instant that I realized my instincts had been correct. An inexorable change had taken place. That night, I was haunted by restlessness, my mind racing with our shared past, the laughter, the smiles, the beautiful days we'd known. Yet, in that dark hour, it all seemed to crumble before me. The following day, Chastity was as preoccupied as ever, her words few and far between, her demeanor distant. Any mention of Michael was met with a deflection, her frustration with me evident. The truth became clear. Our marriage had irrevocably altered. "Are you and Michael involved?" I mustered the nerve to inquire on that fateful day. A moment of icy stillness followed before she exhaled a heavy sigh and responded in a low tone. "I never intended to cause you pain. I simply—" Her sentence trailed off, leaving the air thick with unspoken words. I knew what those unspoken words meant, and that knowledge shattered me. That night, my emotions overwhelmed me. I confined myself to my study, allowing the tears to saturate my pillow. The thought of facing Chastity again or determining my next steps in life seemed insurmountable. My marriage was no longer the sanctuary I had once known, and I felt adrift, a stranger in my own life. Her frosty demeanor, her impatience, and the haunting words she left me with, "I didn't want to hurt you," I just echoed like a relentless blade, piercing my heart repeatedly. I had imagined countless scenarios in my mind. What if I had been more vigilant? What if I had spoken up sooner? Perhaps things would have turned out differently. But it was too late for such musings. My heart lay in ruins, like sand scatters in the wind, with no foundation left to stand on. As despair began to consume me, my phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Julie. She and I shared a robust father-daughter connection. Even though she was no longer a child, she possessed an uncanny ability to sense my distress. Julie had always been my most trusted confidant and pillar of support, particularly during the tumultuous times in my marriage with Chastity. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern, as though she already had an inkling of my turmoil. I drew a deep breath, attempting to stifle my tears. "Julie, I'm at a loss," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Don't worry, I'll be there shortly," she assured me gently before ending the call. In no time, Julie arrived at the house, clad in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, her hair loosely tied back. She exuded a blend of concern and a maturity that seemed to transcend her years. Upon seeing me, she didn't rush to speak. Instead, she approached and enveloped me in a tender embrace. We stood in silence for a moment, simply holding each other. "You know, Dad, I'm always here for you," she whispered, her voice quivering slightly. I felt the weight of her concern, yet the helplessness of a father was equally palpable. Julie had always possessed wisdom beyond her years, never allowing any distance to form between us. Even as an adult, she made it a point to return home for meals and to share the intricacies of her life with me. She had been my silent support, through thick and thin. The tempest of emotions churned within me as Julie sat in contemplative silence, then gave a subtle nod. "I understand, Dad. In truth, I've been aware of this for some time." My heart skipped a beat. "You were aware?" The surprise in my voice was evident. I hadn't anticipated her admission. She affirmed with a nod, her eyes flitting away momentarily before she regained her poise. "I intercepted the messages. I witnessed her exchanges with Michael. I was concerned, yet I was at a loss on how to approach you." Her voice quavered. "I didn't wish to cause you pain, but the truth needed to be brought to light." I clasped her hand, a cocktail of sentiments swirling through me. As a father, it pained me to think Julie had been engulfed by this turmoil. Her youth should have been carefree, not shadowed by the breakdown of our marriage. Yet, she had not only felt the sting of it but had also borne a portion of the emotional weight for me. "You shouldn't bear this burden, Julie," I murmured, my voice tinged with helplessness. "I shouldn't have involved you. Dad, don't apologize," she retorted firmly. "I'm hurting too. I was aware of Mom's involvement with Michael. Your apology isn't necessary. I comprehend." I hung my head, a moment of silence enveloping us. It struck me then. In my quest to shield Julie, she had often been my silent guardian. Amidst the emotional maelstrom, we were both adrift, finding solace in each other's presence. "What will you do next?" Julie queried, her tone even but resolute. "Will you forgive Mom?" I met her gaze, detecting no rancor, only profound comprehension. I recognized that she was braced for the impending trials. Even though she might not fully grasp the intricacies of marriage, she valued fidelity and emotional integrity. "I'm uncertain, Julie," I admitted softly. "Her actions with Michael, they transcend my capacity for forgiveness." Julie acknowledged with a nod, her eyes reflecting a quiet resolve. "Dad, regardless of your decision, I stand with you. I know you're acting in your best interest." At that moment, a crucial realization dawned on me. Irrespective of future events, Julie was my constant. She was more than my daughter. She was my pillar of strength. Her support provided a soothing balm, invigorating me to forge ahead. "You don't need to thank me, Dad," she murmured, her lips curving into a gentle smile as she lightly patted my shoulder. "I'll be here for you, come what may." Julie's words of encouragement were a beacon, guiding me towards acceptance of the harsh reality. She imparted the fortitude needed to forge ahead, undeterred by the unpredictability of the future. I was certain that, regardless of the twists and turns life might take, Julie and I would confront them united. Days later, the internal strife continued to eat at me, despite my recognition that things could never revert to their former state. I found myself parked on the couch in our living room, my gaze fixes on the void before me, my mind a prisoner to the relentless replay of Chastity's cutting remarks and icy gestures. Her words, "I didn't want to hurt you," echoed in my mind, yet her duplicity had cut through the fabric of trust one had in her with the precision of a scalpel. Time and again, I questioned if I had failed her in some way, if there was a path I could have taken to prevent this, but the truth remained unyielding. Her betrayal was an irrefutable fact that I had to confront. Julie assured me that she held no blame towards me, her sole wish being my recovery, but even with her steadfast support, the void within seemed impossible to fill. Her eyes, windows to her soul, mirrored the pain she too silently bore. I found myself in deep contemplation, not only about the marriage but about Chastity as an individual. She was not an ordinary woman. Her history, her profession, seemed inextricably linked to something more profound, something perhaps preordained. Chastity, a seasoned lawyer at a prestigious firm, had experienced the ebb and flow of her career with grace, anchoring herself with her intellect and tenacity. When we first crossed paths, she was a recent graduate of law school, brimming with youthful ambition and fervor for her future. She often spoke of the challenges she faced as a woman in a male-centric legal landscape, asserting the need for doubled effort to achieve parity with her male counterparts. As the years passed, however, a chill began to seep into our relationship, and she grew increasingly distant. Her work became a convenient excuse, a barrier that drove a wedge between us, chipping away at the foundation of trust we had built. Her frequent late nights at the office and the fatigue in her eyes signaled a waning concern for me or our family. My attempts to bridge the gap with conversation were met with monosyllabic, emotionless responses. Conversing with Michael, her voice carried an undercurrent of flirtation, devoid of any trace of remorse. Laughter punctuated their interaction, as if nothing were amiss. I chose not to disturb them. Instead, I slipped away silently. It was in that moment I entertained the thought. Perhaps she had never truly committed to our union. Her heart might have wandered long before I ever caught wind of it. One thing about Michael's hold on her eludes my comprehension. I confided in Julie over breakfast one morning. Noting my reticence, she inquired softly, "Dad, have you arrived at a decision?" Taking a moment to gather my thoughts, I responded, "Her schedule is demanding, but her demeanor has shifted entirely. She no longer exhibits interest in us, in me. Michael, on the other hand, is more than a mere friend to her. He occupies a role I hadn't previously recognized." Julie set aside her utensil, her gaze brimming with empathy. "You see, Dad, Mom's professional pressures are immense, and her ambition is unyielding. But I believe she's lost her sense of self somewhere along her journey." She hesitated before adding, "Her detachment from you isn't solely a result of her career. There's a deeper issue at play." I was taken aback by her insight. "A deeper issue?" she prompted. "Do you recall the first time she was unfaithful?" Julie asked abruptly, her voice tinged with the gravity of the question. A sharp pain clenched my chest. That incident had left an indelible mark on me, a wound I had struggled to heal. Her infidelity with a colleague had nearly shattered me, but she had offered an apology and vowed it would not recur. For a time, I had convinced myself that we had moved past that dark chapter. Julie's words, however, suggested a more troubling reality. Perhaps that betrayal was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of deeper underlying issues. "Are you suggesting that the stress from her career left her feeling adrift, leading her to seek solace elsewhere?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Julie nodded in confirmation. I believe that's the case, Dad. Mom always aspired to perfection, pouring herself into her career. But I think she lost sight of us, of you in the process. I remained silent, the weight of her words settling deeply within me. As a legal professional, Chastity was well versed in the distinction between right and wrong. She should have been acutely aware of the repercussions of her actions, that my feelings were entitled to consideration. Yet she had not. It seemed she had been ensnared in her own world, disregarding both me and our marriage. I spoke softly, my voice tinged with grief. Julie remained silent for a moment, her response a mere whisper of a sigh. Her gaze held a depth of comprehension, yet she recognized the limits of her ability to mend what was broken. Dad, I'm aware this is a tangled web, but you must confront it. Mom might be oblivious to the pain her actions have caused you, she remarked, her tone soothing yet resolute. I acknowledged her words with a nod, my heart weighed down by sorrow and doubt. The betrayal by Chastity was a nightmarish reality, and though it no longer marred the surface of our union, its mark on my spirit was indelible. I was poised to make even tougher choices, vowing not to be ensnared by relentless anguish again. As I sat in the desolate living room, memories cascaded through my mind as though time had reversed itself. I envisioned my younger self, standing beside Chastity at the outset of our marriage. Then, everything had seemed idyllic, as if no challenge could withstand our combined strength. We were youthful, dream-filled, and in love, with happiness readily within our grasp. But now everything lay in ruins. Chastity's betrayal had carved a chasm too profound to bridge, one that had intertwined with my life and memories. Julie was no longer the innocent child I once knew. She had matured, and with that growth, she possessed a deeper understanding than I had anticipated. She had always pierced through my internal strife, and with a serene fortitude, she anchored me amidst the emotional tempest. One evening, she posed a question that took me aback. Dad, I know you shy away from the past, but I often wonder, what transformed Mom into the person she is today? Her inquiry prompted me to acknowledge that we had never truly delved into our history. Julie's curiosity about the dynamics between Chastity and me, particularly the unseen aspects of our story, compelled me to revisit a long-buried chapter. I inhaled deeply and met Julie's gaze. I'm aware you've always sought to comprehend our past, to decipher why Mom ended up as she did. It's a difficult subject to broach. Our marriage was fraught with complexities, and it may not be entirely clear to you at this juncture. You should be aware that Chastity faced a significant hurdle in the nascent stages of our marriage. I began, memories of a bygone era resurfacing. At that juncture, Chastity and I had recently tied the knot. We resided in a humble abode, yet it was brimming with love. Those initial days were permeated with the delight of acclimating to our new life as a married couple. Chastity had embarked on a career at a law firm, and I was employed as an engineer at a small enterprise. We were youthful, brimming with aspirations and fervor, and the horizon appeared promising. However, beneath the veneer of tranquility, our marriage was fraught with underlying tensions. While Chastity's career trajectory was ascending rapidly, I was beset by a gnawing sensation that I wasn't contributing sufficiently to our household. I started to perceive myself as a mere appendage to her burgeoning success. Her accomplishments instilled pride within me, yet they also sowed seeds of self-doubt. It was on one fateful day that I uncovered evidence of her first infidelity. The discovery remains etched in my mind as if it occurred yesterday. I stumbled upon some text messages on her phone, and my world was shattered. The messages, though not explicitly damning, carried an undercurrent of intimacy that was impossible to overlook. It struck me with the force of a thunderclap. I confronted her, my voice tinged with disbelief. Chastity, I found the messages, I stated. What's happening? Why would you betray me? Her gaze was riddled with remorse and confusion. I'm at a loss for words. I didn't intend for it to unfold this way. I never wanted to harm you, but I'm unsure of my own desires anymore. In that moment, I didn't leap to a decision. Overwhelmed by shock and anger, I also recognized the void in communication and trust that plagued our relationship. I opted to afford her an opportunity to elucidate her actions, to delve into her psyche, and reassess the fabric of our union. If you're open to it, we can collaborate to mend this, I proposed, striving to maintain composure despite the ache that gripped my heart. Following that encounter, we engaged in numerous discussions, each leaving me emotionally drained. Yet we persisted. As time elapsed, we found ourselves succumbing to the relentless passage. Chastity appeared to be consumed by her career, becoming increasingly engrossed in her work, while my trust in her eroded. It was as if we were caught in an inescapable tragedy. I paused, casting a glance back at Julie. That first betrayal left an indelible scar on our marriage, one we were unable to heal. Even after forgiving her, I knew the damage had already been inflicted. In the depth of her gaze, I saw the dawning of understanding. So it wasn't merely about you or me, was it? It was about her own battles. I acknowledged with a nod, the weight of my heart apparent. Indeed, Julie, she may have betrayed me, but she was blind to the wound she inflicted upon our family. Once, we shared exquisite memories, but now, they seem eclipsed by the shadow of our transgressions. Julie reclined on the sofa, lost in contemplation. I grasp it now, Dad. Perhaps you don't need to bear the brunt of what Mom decided. Her choice stands, and we must carve our own path forward, she mused, her words resonating deeply within me. Her insight struck a chord. Julie was correct. As much as I detested conceding it, my agony couldn't alter the facts. Chastity's actions had sealed the fate of our union, and it was time for me to muster the fortitude to forge ahead. That night, as I lay in bed, the dim overhead light casting dancing shadows across my face, my thoughts were in turmoil, unable to find repose. From the moment I awoke to the present, my mind was ensnared by thoughts of Chastity, the state of our marriage, and Julie's future. I was at the crossroads, needing to choose between enduring the betrayal or bringing an end to the marriage and rebuilding my life. Julie, perceptive as ever, detected my distress. We engaged in a lengthy conversation that night, her quiet presence beside me, as I recounted the past until I verbalized the emotions that had been bottling up inside. Dad, you've been joyless for too long, she said gently, her voice piercing my heart. You fought to save this relationship, but Mom is no longer the person you cherished. She's undergone a transformation. She paused, her eyes brimming with determination. If you remain trapped in the past, you'll miss out on the opportunities that the future holds. I found it impossible to release my grasp on the past. We shared so many beautiful moments, I confessed, my voice faltering as I fought to rein in the sorrow constricting my chest. I foolhardily held on to hope, believing she might recognize her error and that we could revival our relationship. But the truth has finally dawned on me. It's a fantasy that will never materialize. Julie remained silent for a moment, her eyes reflecting a storm of empathy. She then extended her hand, clasping mine with a warmth and resolve that provided a modicum of solace. You need not suffer any longer, Dad, she murmured, her tone steady and unwavering. It's time for a new beginning. You are entitled to a more fulfilling life. In her gaze, I sensed a wave of appreciation. Julie had become my solitary anchor, revealing a future brimming with possibility and helping me acknowledge my genuine needs. No longer the accommodating spouse, I had evolved into a father compelled to assert his autonomy. For Julie's sake, and for my own, the arduous choice to separate was inevitable. The following day, I found myself in a lawyer's office, navigating a labyrinth of legal complexities. The lawyer's explanation of the divorce process, asset distribution, and custody matters felt like an invasion, each legal term a shard of pain. The stark reality of my situation was a bitter pill to swallow. Are you prepared? He inquired. I inhaled deeply and affirmed with a nod. I am ready. The decision to divorce was like a harrowing dream transitioning into tangible reality. I started organizing papers, compiling evidence, and readying myself for the uncharted life ahead. Throughout this ordeal, I underwent a profound emotional catharsis. Reflecting on our happier times brought a sting of ache and remorse. Yet I understood that relinquishing the past was essential for a future unshackled. Julie stood by my side, her support and encouragement a pillar of strength. One day she said to me, "Dad, I have faith you'll find happiness. You're worthy of a better life." Her simple words, brimming with love, soothed my aching heart. Several months passed, and the divorce was ultimately settled. Chastity relocated, and Julie and I embarked on a new chapter. The union that once brought us pain was now a distant memory, and we were eager to forge ahead. Nestled in a location nearer to Julie's school and boasting a more favorable environment, I found myself at the crossroads of reevaluating my life. I was striving to rediscover my own pace amidst the relentless demands of work. The weight of professional pressures persisted, yet the alleviate of no longer bearing the burden of Chastity's betrayal was a liberating relief. I embarked on a journey of self-discovery through new hobbies, such as morning jogs, or spending quality time with Julie at the movies, cherishing the simple joys of a father-daughter bond. Despite the inherent challenges that accompanied this new chapter, I was far from solitary. I recognized that the past was an unyielding closed door, while the future lay open, ready to be molded by my own hands. The post-divorce landscape was far from a stroll in the park. On the surface, I may have appeared to have regained my equilibrium, but internally, the tempest of emotions remained unquiet. Each day's dawn broke to the sight of poignant voids, the empty closet that once held Chastity's presence, the hushed stillness of a house devoid of her voice, and a kitchen bereft of her culinary aroma. Familiar routines had morphed into relics of the past, leaving me to navigate the quietude of our home with the fortitude to forge ahead. Julie, however, seemed to navigate the shifting tides with greater alacrity than I. She embraced our new reality with vigor, forging friendships at school, and dive into extracurricular pursuits. Yet, in the quiet moments, her discomfort was palpable. The carefree spirit that once defined her had given way to a girl haunted by thoughtful silences. There were occasions when her gaze would drift, lost in a sea of contemplation. As her father, I was acutely aware that the divorce's impact had cut deeper than I had acknowledged. One evening, we found ourselves in the glow of the living room's TV. Julie's face, illuminated by the flickering screen, held a far-off look until she turned to me, setting the remote aside. "Dad, how's Mom doing?" she inquired softly, her tone tinged with an undercurrent of concern or perhaps uncertainty. I exhaled, setting aside my newspaper to lock eyes with her. "She's moved on, started anew," I replied. "Julie, there are unsaid words between you and her, I'm sure, but we must accept that we can't steer others' actions. Our control lies only in our forward momentum." I paused, feeling the gravity of my words. Life is replete with changes, and though adaptation is challenging, we must persevere, looking ahead. Her eyes seemed to wander into the distance, as though she were digesting my words. Eventually, she found her voice, a mere murmur escaping her lips. "I understand, Dad. It's simply, I can't help but ponder why Mom's affection has waned." A fragility permeated her tone, tugging at my heartstrings. I approached and settled beside her, draping my arm around her shoulders in a comforting embrace. Her expression of love may have shifted, but it doesn't diminish her feelings. She's currently misplaced and she erred. We all stumble, Julie. The crux lies in our response to those missteps. Julie snuggled closer, immersed in her own thoughts. Her silence stretched on, yet it was evident that comprehension was dawning on her. While she might not have found complete solace, she was striving to release the past and forge a future that she could mold. As days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting on my own life. For years, I had dedicated myself to the upkeep of a stable marriage and family, overlooking my personal aspirations. The divorce served as a catalyst, compelling me to acknowledge my entitlement to pursue those long-neglected dreams. My existence was no longer dictated by another person's whims. I was free to rediscover myself, to engage in activities that brought me joy, and to embrace fresh challenges. I took up a photography class, an interest I had harbored but never acted upon. With newfound time on my hands, I ventured into the park with my camera, capturing the splendor of nature. Each time I clicked the shutter, a sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced in years washed over me. It was not merely about recording the external world. It was a journey of self-discovery. In parallel, I began to broaden my social horizons. I met new acquaintances, shared movie outings, enjoyed coffee breaks, and embarked on weekend excursions. While I was in no hurry to dive into a new relationship, I relished the simple delights of social interaction, reclaiming the joys of life. Julie would often tease me, saying, "Dad, you seem to be aging backward lately." Occasionally, we'd head to the store together, transforming the trip into a mini-adventure as we discussed dinner options or cooked side by side at home. Those seemingly trivial moments evolved into my most treasured memories. I no longer allowed the shadows of the past to weigh me down, nor did I let chastity's betrayal define me. I learned to value the present, to cherish the time with Julie, and gradually, the sunlight began to filter back into my life. The ache of yesteryear once held dominion over me. I ceased to bear the burden of bygones. It dawned on me that existence cannot forever dwell in the penumbra. Each sunrise beckons a pristine chance to recommence. Despite the unpredictability of what lies ahead, I am now imbued with the fortitude to forge my own bliss, to chase the aspirations I had long abandoned. Julie, in her own right, started to flourish. Her grin grew more luminous, her chuckle more sincere, and the connection we shared intensified. The hours we whiled away together, in serene moments on the sofa or traversing trails on weekends, formed the fabric of fresh recollections we were weaving. Although the remnants of our past miseries persisted, I was certain that we were both emerging from the shadows, heading towards a horizon brimming with promise. Occasionally, in the quiet of the night, I would awaken and cast my gaze upon the celestial bodies, pondering the unknown of tomorrow. The answers remained elusive, but one truth was steadfast. Julie and I would confront whatever the morrow held, united. I was no longer the disoriented soul I once was. I had reclaimed my essence and stood prepared to welcome whatever the future entailed. I held faith that the days in store would not only be less arduous but also more abundant and fulfilling, and I relished the prospect of the life we were yet to craft.